When Miss Carter dismissed a black student for sharing her views, she didn't realize the girl's mother was the president of the school board. This single act set off a chain of events that would upend her world. The ensuing developments would surprise even those who had seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Aisha Jackson had just transferred to the prestigious Woodsdale School. For this 16-year-old black girl, this was a crucial opportunity. Studying at such a school would open doors to top universities. From the start, Aisha felt a bit out of place among the wealthy, predominantly white students, but she remained determined and composed. Her dedication and serious attitude toward her studies quickly set her apart. In one of her first history classes, Miss Carter, a strict and demanding teacher with a decade of experience, discussed the achievements of historical figures. The students responded briefly, mostly parroting the textbook. At one point, Aisha raised her hand to contribute something original. Though Miss Carter nodded at her, she didn't seem particularly interested. "I believe that a significant part of history is the struggle for human rights," Aisha began confidently. "Many of the accomplishments and discoveries of great people happened not because they were exceptional, but because they fought for justice and the chance to be equal." Aisha barely finished when Miss Carter cut her off sharply. "I think that's enough, Miss Jackson." Her voice was cold and detached. "We're in a history class, not philosophy. Such thoughts are better left for another class." Miss Carter's words felt like a reprimand. The room fell silent, and a few students whispered among themselves, while Aisha felt eyes full of curiosity and bewilderment on her. She felt a surge of indignation, but kept her composure. Her gaze was steady, but she remained silent. Noticing the class's reaction, Miss Carter added with a slight smirk, "At our school, we follow strict rules for conducting classes. I suggest you, Miss Jackson, adhere to these standards if you intend to succeed here." Later that day, in her literature class, Aisha decided to read a book not on the syllabus while waiting for the discussion to begin. Miss Carter noticed this and looked visibly irritated. "Miss Jackson," she snapped, "if you can't follow the curriculum, I suggest you leave the class. Perhaps you should consider if you're ready for a school of this level." Stunned, Aisha felt a surge of resentment. She wanted to respond but knew it would only worsen the situation. Gathering her things, she left the classroom, trying not to meet the shocked gazes of her classmates. She walked out feeling a deep sense of hurt and injustice. This injustice resonated in her as a profound pain. Aisha walked down the school corridors, the weight of what had happened pressing on her. She wanted to tell her mother, but feared it would cause unnecessary trouble. However, word of the conflict quickly spread among students, and soon the deputy principal and then the principal became aware of the incident. To justify her actions, Miss Carter decided to call Aisha's parents immediately, warning them of their daughter's troublesome behavior. She had no idea who Aisha's mother was. Across town, LaTonya Jackson, a successful and confident woman who chaired the school board, received a call from Miss Carter. The teacher described Aisha's behavior, subtly hinting at an inappropriate interest in extra topics and a lack of respect for school rules. LaTonya listened without emotion, though inside she felt indignation building. Without revealing her position, she arranged a meeting to address the situation directly. The next day, LaTonya arrived at the school. In the principal's office, she was met by the principal, the deputy principal, and Miss Carter, who barely recognized the elegantly dressed mother of the problematic student as the serious woman before her. As she introduced herself, LaTonya noted the surprise on their faces turned to concern. She firmly began the conversation. "Miss Carter, I'd like to understand why my daughter was dismissed from her class." Miss Carter, initially taken aback, tried to explain that Aisha disrupted discipline and that her thoughts on equality created tension among other students. She spoke confidently about the importance of maintaining order. LaTonya listened patiently before replying with calm assurance. Aisha should feel safe and able to openly express her views, just like any other student. If teachers can't handle this, perhaps the issue isn't with her, but with your methods. The principal and deputy principal, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, cautiously suggested discussing further steps to maintain a positive atmosphere. But Latonia had already sensed the truth. Behind the polite words lay a bias that Miss Carter didn't even recognize. Latonia concluded the meeting, hinting that the school board would monitor the situation closely. As she left, she met Miss Carter's eyes, which showed a mix of fear and confusion. The teacher finally understood the difficult position she was now in. Tension began building in the school. Students discussed the situation, with many supporting Aisha and spreading rumors about her mother's influence. Miss Carter realized her actions would now face scrutiny. After the tense meeting, Latonia decided to use her authority as school board president to escalate the issue. She organized an emergency meeting, inviting the principal, the deputy principal, Miss Carter, and other board members. News of the meeting spread quickly through the school, sparking widespread discussions among students and parents. Everyone sensed this event could bring significant change. On the day of the meeting, Latonia stepped up to the podium. She began by discussing the school's core goals: education, respect, and equal opportunities for all students, regardless of race or social status. Her speech shifted to the recent incident involving her daughter, but she refrained from expressing personal grievances, focusing instead on the issue objectively. She emphasized the importance of ensuring every student felt heard and respected. Meanwhile, Miss Carter sat tensely upright, feeling the atmosphere around her growing hostile. Some board members started asking questions about teachers' approaches toward students of different backgrounds, subtly hinting at biases. Under pressure, Carter initially tried to defend herself, citing rules and discipline, but her words sounded unconvincing. In the eyes of those around her, she appeared increasingly as someone clinging to outdated and discriminatory views. "Discipline is important, Miss Carter," Latonia said calmly. "But when discipline turns into stifling opinions and blocking growth, that's a different story." Teachers and the principal exchanged glances, sensing that Latonia's words signaled impending change. The meeting climaxed with Latonia's proposal to implement programs on bias awareness and racial issues for all teachers. Her initiative received approving nods from the board members, and the principal realized he couldn't resist the rising tide of change. Miss Carter, recognizing that resistance was futile, reluctantly agreed to participate in the program, though she inwardly simmered with resentment. Yet even she sensed that a reassessment of her methods was necessary. Doubt and self-awareness began to gnaw at her. The meeting concluded with the adoption of the program, and the school began moving toward change. A few weeks passed since the school introduced a new program on inclusivity and respect for cultural diversity. The atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Students and teachers became more mindful of their words and actions, avoiding stereotypes and bias. Posters now adorned the classrooms and hallways, reminding everyone of the importance of equality and respect for every student. The principal began holding regular meetings with teachers to discuss the challenges and successes that arose from the new approach. For Miss Carter, the training had been a challenging ordeal. She learned about subtle forms of bias and recognized that she might have underestimated her own prejudices. Reflecting on her words and actions toward Aisha, she realized her behavior had been humiliating and unfair. This realization created an inner conflict. At first, she felt irritation and shame, but eventually, she admitted she needed to face herself honestly for real change. One evening, sitting alone in the teacher's lounge, Carter thought long and hard about how to resolve these feelings. She understood that if she wanted to rebuild her reputation and become a better teacher, she needed to speak with Aisha and apologize. This step felt especially difficult, but she knew she owed it to herself and her students. The next day, after classes ended, Carter asked Aisha to stay for a few minutes. The room fell silent, tension hung in the air, and Aisha, a bit wary, looked at her teacher, unsure of what to expect. "Aisha," Miss Carter began, her voice softer and more sincere than ever. "I understand that I acted wrongly. I was unfair to you and to other students when I dismissed your thoughts as inappropriate in this classroom, and I deeply regret that." Aisha looked at her, surprised, not expecting such directness. The sincerity in Miss Carter's eyes told Aisha this apology was genuine. Her teacher's words dissolved the barrier between them. Aisha said nothing, absorbing what she had heard, but felt a weight lift that she had carried since their first conflict. It wasn't easy for me to admit my mistakes, but I had to do it, Carter continued, holding her gaze. You're a smart and courageous girl, and your voice matters. I'm grateful that you were strong enough to stand by your views, even when it was hard. You helped me see my own flaws, and I'll work to improve. Aisha smiled, feeling the tension dissipate. She accepted the apology, realizing that her stand for fairness had truly mattered. Her determination to confront injustice had led to change, not only for herself, but for her classmates, who would now find it easier to express their thoughts. Meanwhile, LaTonya Jackson, observing the changes in the school, saw how her efforts and Aisha's resilience bore fruit. At the next board meeting, she received thanks from other parents and teachers who shared that the new program had helped them better understand their students. LaTonya felt a sense of pride in her daughter's courage and patience and confidence that even in the face of bias, meaningful change was possible. The story concludes with Miss Carter leading a history lesson, discussing the importance of the fight for equality and justice. She no longer shied away from open discussions. Instead, she encouraged students to share their thoughts and ideas. Sitting in the front row, Aisha saw that her teacher had transformed. Miss Carter had become a symbol of change and a model of how sincere apologies and self-reflection could turn even the strictest teacher into an ally, supporting students and giving them a sense of belonging. Thus, through Aisha's courage and persistence, and her mother's efforts, Woodsdale School became a fairer and more inclusive place, where everyone had the right to respect and acknowledgement.